Debate. The honourable member for Parkdale, High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for their enthusiasm in support of this important bill from our colleague from Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. I'd like to thank her for all her work in seeking protection for interns. And I especially want to thank her for coming to my riding of Parkdale High Park and participating in a round table on the issue of internships. And she was very, very diligent and spent quite a bit of time meeting with folks in our community who were very supportive of the bill, Bill 636, which we are debating today. We met with students from the Canadian Federation of Students, the Canadian Interns Association, students from the University of Toronto, and some folks who are unpaid interns who certainly would be affected by this bill. And what we heard from them, Mr. Speaker, is that, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
The chair, order. Order. The chair has recognized the honourable member for Parkdale High Park. And we know that in the House, of course, if members are close, they can go about quiet conversations, usually without much disruption. However, when that gets to be out to 10 or 15 or 20 meters, that can be a whole different matter. So I'd ask the House to confine their conversations to the quiet mode, if not, perhaps out in the lobbies. The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly don't want to deter my colleagues in their enthusiasm for my presentation, which is always, of course, welcome. As I was saying, there was a very interesting round table in Parkdale High Park that the member from Rivière-des-Mille-Îles participated in and was able to gain a great deal of support from intern organizations and from youth and students in our community. And they were very enthusiastic about Bill 636. They talked about how the average level of student debt is about $28,000 on graduation. $28,000. That's a huge burden for young people to be saddled with when they're just starting out in their working lives. And we know that youth unemployment in Canada, due to the lackluster economic performance of our economy and the lack of clear policies and initiatives by this federal government, persistently high youth unemployment has been a serious burden and a serious challenge for young people in our society today. So many, in fact, are quite excited about and happy to take on internship programs, and they feel that will help them get important experience as they begin their working lives, but they need some basic protections, they need some clear rules, and that's what Bill 636 is all about, Mr. Speaker. I was very glad to hear my colleague across the aisle agree with the NDP that there should be a growing number of paid internships. We think this is an important step forward, and we're glad to see that government members do agree with us in the need for paid internships. However, we're very disappointed that they don't support an effective measure, which this bill is, to protect interns and set clear rules for them. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about basic protections in the workplace, Mr. Speaker. Protection from sexual harassment, protection around health and safety. We know that young workers are especially vulnerable to workplace accidents. They have a higher accident rate. So for interns, young people just starting out, they're not even covered by basic health and safety legislation. That needs to change. And they need reasonable hours of work. Young people who are hungry to get into the workforce, it's easy for them to be exploited. And what they need are clear hours of work, rest days, and recognition of statutory holidays. We also need clear rules, which this bill lays out, that the internship should be beneficial to the intern and not just the employer. It needs to be educational, linked to their program of study, and that the employer needs to inform the intern about hours of work, the kinds of work that they'll be undertaking, whether or not they'll be paid, and there should be record keeping of the hours that they're working. Now, the reality is that because of the lack of federal rules, there has been an exploitation of young workers, and often entry-level jobs, which in the past were paid, are being replaced by paid internships. The reality is that interns deserve protections of anyone who would expect protection if they were paid, which many people are not. Just let me give you a couple of examples. Last year, Bell Mobility was forced to close down an internship program they had after public scrutiny exposed that they had hosted more than 280 unpaid interns and forced them to work overtime. These interns were essentially performing work of paid employees and probably should have been paid. And in fact, some of the interns are seeking back wages. It also came to light the terrible tragedy of a young man named Andy Ferguson, who in 2013, as an unpaid intern, had been working at a radio station. In 2011, he'd been working at an Edmonton radio station, working long back-to-back shifts. And when he went home that night, he fell asleep at the wheel and was killed in a traffic accident. The Federal Labor Program investigation determined that he was not an employee and therefore not covered by the Canada Labour Code. Mr. Speaker, that must change. We need to make sure that young people have basic workplace protections. And in March of last year, in 2014, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance produced a report on youth employment in Canada. I was pleased to participate in that report. And recommendation number 9 states that the federal government work with the provinces and territories to ensure appropriate protections under relevant labour codes. That's an important recommendation. That would include the Canada Labour Code. The Canada Labour Code provides basic protections on things like hours of work, the right to refuse dangerous work, and freedom from sexual harassment in the workplace. But as of right now, these protections do not apply to unpaid interns. And unlike many provinces, the federal government has no rules governing the use of unpaid internships to ensure young Canadians are not exploited. So this must change, Mr. Speaker. What we want, I see my time is almost up, basically what we want is adequate protection for all workers, whether they're interns or paid workers. We want limits on the use of unpaid internships to those which are educational and of benefit to the intern, so that they get something out of it, that this really is a stepping stone into a career. We want active enforcement of updated labour laws, and we want StatsCan to track the use of unpaid internships. What we don't know about, what we're not measuring, we can't take action on. Mr. Speaker, this is a basic issue of intergenerational equity. As people who have already been active in the workforce, people who have established their careers, established their track records, we need to make sure that the next generation of young people has the same opportunities, that they can use their education, that they can gain that foothold in the workplace, and get the kind of experience they need to have successful careers. I would urge my colleagues across the aisle to reconsider their negativity on this issue of internships, support Bill 636, and let's do the job that young people would expect us to do as their parliamentarians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.